What you're about to hear will make you question every quiet trail, every fog-covered back road, and every knock on your cabin door in the middle of the night. Welcome back to Busta Stories, the channel that doesn't deal in fiction, but in fact. I'm your host, and tonight we're heading deep into the spine of America, the Appalachian Mountains, a place of beauty, folklore, and darkness. Stretching over 2,000 miles, the Appalachians are home to some of the most remote terrain in the United States. Isolated communities, forgotten towns, and stories that have never made the evening news until now. The encounters you're about to hear were not taken from Reddit threads or old wives' tales. These are real reports, backed by witness statements, local records, and in some cases, the authorities themselves. These aren't ghost stories. These are disturbing truths that locals whisper about, but rarely speak of aloud. So lock your doors, turn down the lights, and prepare yourself, because once you know what's hiding in the hollers, you might never look at Appalachia the same way again. The air in the Smoky Mountains carried a weight I couldn't shake, a silent warning woven into the rustling leaves and the distant hum of the forest. I stood on the cabin's porch, my breath catching, as I realized the door in front of me, flimsy, warped, barely hanging on its hinges, offered no protection from whatever lurked beyond the trees. I'd always found solace in the wilderness. The dense canopy of the Smokies, with its towering pines and mist-cloaked ridges, had been my refuge long before I met Philip. For years, I'd hiked alone, letting the forest's quiet drown out the noise of my life. But this time, standing in front of a cabin that looked like it could collapse under a strong gust, I felt something different, something wrong. The ad had promised rustic charm, a cozy retreat nestled in the heart of the mountains. What we got was a dilapidated shack, its wooden walls weathered to a sickly gray, the windows clouded with grime that seemed to pulse with secrets. Philip had planned this trip, a week-long escape, to recharge after months of soul-draining work. I trusted him to handle it, grateful for his effort to pull me out of the rut I'd been sinking into. We'd stayed in a cabin in these same mountains a year ago, a perfect trip filled with laughter and starlit nights. This time, though, everything felt off from the moment we arrived. The gravel path leading to the cabin was overgrown, choked with weeds that seemed to writhe in the fading light. The air was thick, heavy, with the scent of damp earth and something metallic I couldn't place. As I stepped inside, the floorboards groaned under my weight, each creak amplifying the unease curling in my gut. The interior was sparse, a sagging couch, a rickety table, a fireplace that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Dust hung in the air, catching the weak sunlight filtering through the windows. I turned to Philip, my voice tight. This isn't what the ad showed. That door, it wouldn't stop a child. He laughed, a sound that usually warmed me, but now felt hollow, like it was meant to distract. "It's fine," he said, his hand brushing my arm. "We're in the middle of nowhere. No one's coming out here." His eyes held mine for a moment too long, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was studying me, waiting for me to agree. I forced a nod, but the knot in my chest tightened. That first night, we pushed the couch against the door. It wasn't much, but the thought of that flimsy barrier being our only defense made my skin crawl. I lay awake in the lumpy bed, staring at the ceiling, where shadows danced like figures moving just out of sight. The forest outside was too quiet, the kind of silence that feels alive watching. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent my heart racing. I told myself it was just the unfamiliarity of the place, the exhaustion from the drive. But deep down, I knew it was more. The next morning, we planned to hike a nearby trail, one of the longer ones that would keep us out until dusk. I woke early, the gray light of dawn barely creeping through the windows. Freepik was still asleep, his breathing slow and steady, but I couldn't stay still. I needed to move, to shake off the dread that had settled over me like a second skin. I remembered the rope I always carried for safety, left in the car, parked a 15-minute walk away. "I'll be quick," I told Freepik as he stirred, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He mumbled something about getting ready and rolled over, leaving me to face the morning alone. The walk to the car was strangely calming. The forest was awake now, birds calling softly, the air crisp with the promise of summer. I focused on the crunch of gravel under my boots, the way the trees seemed to lean in their branches, brushing against each other, like whispered secrets. By the time I reached the car, I felt almost normal, the unease of the night fading into the background. I grabbed the rope, slung it over my shoulder, and started back, letting the beauty of the mountains pull me in. But as I approached the cabin, something caught my eye. On the porch railing, right in the center, was a cigarette butt. It wasn't fresh, no lingering smell of smoke, but it hadn't been there when we arrived. I froze, my pulse hammering in my ears. Neither of us smoked. I would have noticed it. Yesterday, wouldn't I? I picked it up, the paper dry and brittle between my fingers, and turned it over, searching for some clue. Nothing. Just a plain, unremarkable cigarette, yet it felt like a violation, a mark left by someone who didn't belong. I called out to Freepik as I stepped inside, holding the cigarette up like evidence. He was at the table, lacing his boots, and when he saw it, his face changed. Not shock, not confusion, just a flicker of something I couldn't name, something that made my stomach twist. Probably from the last people who stayed here, he said, his voice too calm, too practiced. Don't worry about it. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to let it go, to chalk it up to an overactive imagination. But the way he looked at me, the way his words seemed to slide over the truth, made my skin prickle. I set the cigarette down and turned away, pretending to busy myself with packing for the hike. But the image of that cigarette burned into my mind, a tiny, insignificant thing that felt like the first crack in something much larger. The hike was long, grueling, but the forest's beauty dulled the edge of my unease. We followed the trail through dense woods, the path winding up steep inclines and past rocky outcrops. By the time we returned to the cabin, the sun was sinking, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. My legs ached, my body heavy with exhaustion, but the cigarette still gnawed at me. I checked the porch again, half expecting to find another, but there was nothing. Just the same warped wood, the same flimsy door. We ate a quiet dinner, the silence between us heavier than it should have been. Freepik was his usual self, joking, charming, but there was an edge to him, a tension I hadn't noticed before. Or maybe I had, and I'd ignored it too, caught up in the idea of this perfect getaway. As we cleaned up, I did my usual rounds, checking the windows, the door, the locks. Everything was secure, or as secure as it could be in a place like this. But as I slid the couch back against the door, the weight of that cigarette returned a silent accusation that something was coming. The forest outside the cabin seemed to hold its breath, the stillness so absolute it felt like the world was waiting for something to break. I stood by the window, my reflection staring back, distorted in the grimy glass, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the mountains were watching me, waiting for me to slip. The cigarette butt had planted a seed of doubt, and by the second day, it was sprouting its roots, curling around every thought. Freepik was up early, brewing coffee on the camp stove, his movements deliberate, almost too casual. I watched him from the couch, my knees pulled to my chest, trying to read the man I thought I knew. We'd been together for 8 months, our relationship born from chance encounters that now felt less like fate and more like a carefully laid trap. I tried to push the thought away, but it clung to me, sticky and insidious. The cigarette wasn't the only thing that felt off. The cabin itself seemed to pulse with a life of its own, the walls creaking at odd moments, the air thick with a dampness that clung to my skin. I told myself it was just the isolation, the way the mountains could make you feel small, exposed. But the unease was growing a low hum in the back of my mind that refused to be silenced. We planned to spend the day exploring a different trail, one closer to the cabin. But the morning brought new problems. The hot water was gone, the shower spitting out icy streams that made my teeth chatter. Then the electricity flickered and died, leaving us in a dim, shadowy world, lit only by the weak sunlight filtering through the trees. The cabin was supposed to be off-grid, but it had 2 generators, both of which Freepik swore he'd checked the night before. "They're probably just old," he said, his voice light, but his eyes darted to the side, avoiding mine. I felt the air shift, a subtle change that made my skin prickle. "We should call the owner," I said, pulling out my phone. No signal, not a single bar. The mountains had swallowed our connection to the outside world, leaving us stranded in this decaying shell of a cabin. Freepik shrugged, unbothered. "I'll figure it out. Don't worry." But his words felt hollow, like he was reciting a script he didn't believe in. I followed him outside as he fiddled with the generators, his hands moving with a confidence that didn't match the situation. The machines sat under a tarp, rusted and ancient, their wires tangled like veins. I stood a few feet away, watching the forest, the trees looming like silent sentinels. Every shadow seemed to move, every rustle of leaves a footstep. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to shake the feeling that we weren't alone. "Let's just leave," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "This isn't relaxing. It's a mess." Freepik paused, his hands still on the generator, and for a moment he didn't respond. When he finally looked at me, his expression was unreadable, a mask of calm that didn't reach his eyes. "We're here now," he said. "Let's make the best of it. I'll handle this." His tone was firm, almost commanding, and it sent a shiver down my spine. I'd never heard him speak like that, not to me. I opened my mouth to argue, but the words caught in my throat. The forest seemed to close in the trees, pressing closer, their branches clawing at the sky. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I didn't know what else to do. The rest of the day was a blur of small tasks, cleaning the cabin, organizing our gear, pretending everything was fine. But the problems piled up. The stove wouldn't light properly. The water from the sink had a faint metallic taste. And every time I stepped outside, I felt eyes on me, invisible but undeniable. I kept checking the porch, half expecting to find another cigarette, another sign that someone had been here. By evening, my nerves were frayed, my thoughts spiraling. I sat on the couch, staring at the door. The couch still pushed against it, like a futile shield. Freepik was outside again, checking the generators, he said, but he'd been gone too long. I tried to call him, but my phone was useless. the screen mocking me with its lack of signal. The cabin felt smaller, the walls closing in the air, thick with the scent of decay. I stood pacing my footsteps loud in the oppressive silence. That's when I heard it, a soft thud, like something heavy hitting the porch. My heart stopped, my breath catching in my throat. I crept to the window, peering through the grime, but the darkness outside was absolute, a black void that swallowed everything. I pressed my ear to the door, listening, but there was nothing. Just the pounding of my own pulse, loud and erratic. I told myself it was nothing, a branch falling, an animal passing by, but the cigarette flashed in my mind, that small, innocuous thing that had shattered my sense of safety. I checked the windows again, my hands shaking as I tested the locks. Everything was secure, but it didn't matter. The cabin wasn't a refuge. It was a trap, and I was starting to wonder who had set it. Philip returned an hour later, his face flushed, his hands smudged with grease. "No luck with the generators," he said, avoiding my gaze. "I'll head to town tomorrow, see if I can find someone to help." "Tomorrow," I snapped, my voice trembling. "Why not now?" "This place isn't right, Philip. Something's wrong." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're stressed. I get it. But you're safe here. I promise." His words were meant to soothe, but they only deepened the chasm between us. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the look in his eyes stopped me. There was something there, something I didn't recognize, a flicker of calculation, of control. I forced a smile, nodding, but inside my mind was racing. I was starting to see Philip not as my protector, but as a puzzle I no longer understood. That night, I lay awake again, the darkness pressing against me like a living thing. The forest was silent, but it wasn't empty. I could feel it, a presence just beyond the walls, watching, waiting. And Philip, lying beside me, his breathing too even, too controlled, felt like a stranger. The darkness in the cabin wasn't just the absence of light. It was a weight, a suffocating force that pressed against my chest, whispering that I was running out of time. I lay there, eyes fixed on the ceiling, every creak of the cabin, a reminder that I was trapped in a place that didn't want me. By the third day, the cabin had become a prison. The lack of electricity, the cold water, the constant sense of being watched, it was all chipping away at my sanity. I hadn't slept properly. Since we arrived, my dreams fractured by images of shadowy figures and that damn cigarette butt. Philip, on the other hand, seemed unfazed. His calm demeanor, a stark contrast to the chaos in my head. I tried to confront him that morning, my voice low, to keep the forest from hearing. We need to leave, Phililip. This isn't a vacation. It's a nightmare. He was at the table, eating a cold breakfast of granola, his eyes fixed on the bowl. "You're overreacting?" he said, not looking up. "It's just a few glitches. I'll go to town today, get help. You stay here, rest." His words hit me like a slap. Stay here alone, in this rotting husk of a cabin, with no way to call for help, no way to protect myself. I opened my mouth to protest, but he cut me off, his voice sharp. "You're stressing me out. Just let me handle it." I froze the air between us, crackling with tension. He'd never spoken to me like that, never dismissed me so coldly. I wanted to grab him, shake him, demand to know why he was acting like this. But fear held me back. Not fear of him, not yet, but fear of what I might uncover if I pushed too hard. "Fine," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I'll stay." He nodded, his expression softening, but it felt like an act, a mask he'd slipped on to keep me compliant. I watched him pack a small bag, his movements quick, purposeful. As he stepped outside, the door creaking shut behind him, I felt a wave of panic crash over me. I was alone now, truly alone in a place that felt like it was waiting to swallow me whole. The hours dragged on, each minute stretching into eternity. I tried to keep busy cleaning the already spotless table, rearranging our gear, anything to distract from the silence. But the cabin seemed to mock me, its walls groaning, its shadows shifting just out of sight. I checked my phone, obsessively, hoping for a signal, but it was useless, a dead weight in my hand. By late afternoon, the light outside had turned a sickly gray, the kind of light that makes everything look wrong, distorted. I paced the cabin, my footsteps echoing, my heart pounding with every sound from the forest. A branch snapping, a bird taking flight. Each noise was a threat, a reminder that I was vulnerable, exposed. I sat on the couch, pulling my knees to my chest, trying to breathe through the panic. That's when I saw it movement outside the window. A shadow, quick and deliberate, darting past the glass. My breath caught my body, freezing as I stared into the darkness. It was too dark to see clearly, but I knew it wasn't Phililip. He would have called out, would have let me know it was him. I crept to the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the knob. But something stopped me, a primal instinct screaming in my head. "Don't open it." I backed away, my eyes darting to the windows, the locks, the couch still pressed against the door. Then I heard it. A soft knock. 3 deliberate taps that sent my heart into my throat. I stood frozen, my hand hovering over the knob, my mind racing. Whoever was out there didn't call out, didn't speak. If it was Philip, he'd say something, wouldn't he? He knew I was alone, knew I was scared. The knocking stopped, replaced by the sound of footsteps retreating, heavy and deliberate, fading into the night. I peeked through the window, my breath fogging the glass. In the faint moonlight, I saw a figure, a man, his back turned, walking into the darkness. I couldn't see his face, couldn't make out details, but the way he moved, slow and purposeful, made my blood run cold. He didn't belong here. He wasn't supposed to be here. I sank to the floor, my back against the couch, my mind spiraling. Had he been watching us? Had he been here the whole time, waiting for Philip to leave? The cigarette flashed in my mind again. That small, insignificant thing, now a glaring warning. I checked the locks again, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the latches. Everything was secure, but it didn't matter. The cabin wasn't safe. It had never been safe. I don't know how long I sat there, curled up in the dark, my breath shallow, my ears straining for any sound. The forest was silent again, but it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the kind that hides things, the kind that makes you feel like prey. I kept seeing that figure in my mind, his back turned, his presence a promise of something terrible. And then I saw it, a white envelope half slid under the door, its edges glowing faintly in the moonlight. My heart stopped, my body trembling as I stared at it. It hadn't been there before. I would have noticed. I crawled forward, my hands shaking, as I picked it up, the paper cold and heavy in my hands. I opened it slowly, my breath hitching, and what I saw inside made the world tilt. Photos. A stack of photos. All of me. The envelope trembled in my hands, its contents spilling onto the floor like a confession from the darkness. Photos of me taken in moments I thought were private stared up at me, each one a violation that tore through my sense of safety, leaving me raw and exposed. There were 4 photos, each one a snapshot of my life, stolen by an unseen eye. The oldest was from 3 years ago, me sitting on a bench on campus, eating a sandwich, oblivious to the world. My hair was longer, then my face softer, untouched by the weight of the years that followed. Another showed me at my doorstep, the angle suggesting it was taken from across the street. My expression tired as I fumbled with my keys. The third was at work, my desk cluttered with papers, my head bent over a computer screen. It couldn't have been more than a week old. But the 4th photo, it was the one that broke me. Me asleep in my own bed, the covers pulled up to my chin, my face peaceful in a way it hadn't been in months. The angle was close, too close, as if someone had stood over me, watching, waiting. My stomach churned, bile rising in my throat as I dropped the photos, my hands shaking so badly I could barely breathe. How could someone have been in my home, in my room, without me knowing? I lived alone. My apartment small and secure. The locks changed when I moved in. The only person with a key was Philip, and the thought of him, his calm demeanor, his strange reactions, sent a wave of nausea through me. I stumbled to the couch, collapsing my mind, racing through every moment we'd spent together. I met Philip in college, my final year. He was a friend of friends, always there at parties, his smile easy, his presence unassuming. I'd noticed him watching me sometimes, his gaze lingering a little too long, but I'd brushed it off as a crush, nothing more. After graduation, we kept running into each other, random encounters at the grocery store, the movie theater, the park. He'd called it fate, and I'd believed him, charmed by the idea that the universe was pulling us together. Now sitting in that cabin, the photos scattered at my feet. Those encounters took on a new shape. Had he been following me? Had he orchestrated those moments, staging them to seem like chance? The cigarette, the generators, his insistence that I stay behind it all, fit together in a way that made my skin crawl. I got up my legs unsteady and checked the windows again, my hands fumbling with the locks. The forest outside was a black void, the trees indistinguishable from the darkness. I pushed the couch against the door, then dragged a cabinet over its weight, scraping against the floor. It wasn't enough, but it was all I had. I sat back down, clutching the photos, my mind spiraling through possibilities. Was the man outside Philip? The figure had been too far, too shadowed to tell, but the build, the way he moved, it could have been him. The thought made me sick, but I couldn't dismiss it. He'd been acting strange since we arrived, his calm facade cracking at the edges. The cigarette, the way he'd dismissed it, the way he'd snapped at me when I suggested leaving it all, pointed to something I didn't want to face. But there was another possibility, one that scared me even more. What if it wasn't Philip? What if someone else had been watching me, following me for years? The photos spanned 3 years, a timeline of my life laid bare. Whoever took them had been patient, methodical, waiting for this moment to reveal themselves. I don't know how long I sat there, the photos burning holes in my hands, my breath shallow and ragged. The cabin was silent, but it wasn't empty. I could feel it, a presence just beyond the walls, watching, waiting. I kept seeing that figure in my mind, his back turned, his footsteps fading into the night. I tried to piece it together, to make sense of the impossible. If it was Philip, why go to all this trouble? Why bring me here? Why leave the photos? If it wasn't him, then who? And how did they know I'd be here in this isolated cabin, cut off from the world? The questions swirled, each one sharper than the last, cutting deeper into my sanity. I thought about running, grabbing my things, and fleeing into the night. But the forest was a labyrinth, and I had no car, no phone, no way to navigate. I was trapped, a prisoner, in a game I didn't understand. The photos lay at my feet, a silent accusation, a reminder that someone had been watching me, studying me for years. And now they were here, in these mountains, closer than ever. The morning light didn't bring relief, only a cold gray clarity that made the cabin feel like a tomb. Philip's return was a moment I both dreaded and needed his presence, a question mark that could either save me or destroy me. I hadn't slept. The photos were hidden under the couch, tucked away, where Philip wouldn't see them. I'd spent the night pacing, checking the windows, listening for footsteps that never came. The forest was silent, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of a predator, waiting, biding its time. When Philip walked in around 10:30 a.m., the faint smell of tobacco clung to him, a scent that hit me like a punch. My heart stopped, my mind flashing to the cigarette on the porch. He looked tired, his clothes rumpled, but his expression was calm, too calm. "No luck in town," he said, dropping his bag on the floor. It was late, so I stayed there. Didn't want to drive back in the dark. His words were casual, but they cut through me. He knew I was alone, knew I was scared, and he'd chosen to stay away. I stared at him, searching for the man I thought I loved, but all I saw was a stranger, his eyes guarded, his smile forced. "You didn't call?" I said, my voice flat. "No signal," he replied, shrugging. "You know how it is out here." I wanted to scream, to shove the photos in his face and demand answers, but fear held me back. If he was involved, confronting him now in this isolated place could be dangerous. If he wasn't, then accusing him would only push him away, leaving me even more alone. I forced myself to nod to play along, but my hands were shaking, my pulse racing. "There was someone outside last night," I said, watching his face closely. "A man." He knocked on the door, then left. And I found this. I didn't show him the photos, not yet, but I described the envelope the way it had appeared under the door. His expression barely changed, a flicker of surprise that felt rehearsed. "You're imagining things," he said, his voice soft, but edged with something I couldn't place. "You're stressed. Maybe you need to talk to someone." The words were a gut punch, a dismissal that made my blood boil. He was trying to make me doubt myself, to make me think I was crazy. But I wasn't crazy. The photos were real. The figure outside was real. And the smell of tobacco on him was real. I wanted to scream, to run, but I knew I had to stay calm to play his game until I could get out. "I'm not imagining it," I said, my voice steady, despite the storm inside me. "Someone was here. Philip. I'm not staying." He sighed, running a hand through his hair, and for a moment I thought he might argue. But then he nodded, his expression softening. "Okay. If you're not feeling well, we can go." I seized on the opportunity, knowing it might be my only chance. "I think I'm getting sick," I said, pressing a hand to my stomach. "I don't want to ruin the trip, but I need to go home." Philip was a hypochondriac, a fact I'd always found amusing until now. The mention of illness made his face tighten, his eyes darting to the door. "Yeah, okay," he said, his voice clipped. "Let's pack up." The drive back was a study in silence. The air between us thick with unspoken questions. I pretended to sleep my head against the window, my eyes half open, watching him. His hands gripped the wheel too tightly, his jaw set in a way that made him look like someone else. I kept the photos hidden in my bag, their weight a constant reminder of the truth I couldn't yet face. When we reached my apartment, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my bag, mumbled a goodbye, and slipped out the back door, my heart pounding as I hailed a cab to the police station. I told them everything, the cigarette, the figure, the photos, but their response was a cold splash of reality. Without hard evidence, they couldn't do anything. The photos weren't enough to prove a crime, and Philip hadn't been violent. I left the station feeling more alone than ever, my trust in the world shattered. The city lights blurred past as the plane took off, carrying me away from everything I thought I knew. I left behind a life tainted by doubt, a home that no longer felt safe, and a man who might have been my stalker or my savior. I didn't go back to my apartment. After the police station, I went straight to the airport, booking the first flight to my parents' state, a place Philip didn't know. I changed my phone, made my parents do the same cutting, every tie to the life I'd built. Some might call it dramatic, but they didn't see those photos, didn't feel the weight of that figure in the darkness, didn't smell the tobacco on Philip's clothes. The flight was a haze, my mind replaying every moment in the cabin, every red flag I'd ignored, the way Philip had chosen the cabin, the way he'd dismissed my fears, the way he'd left me alone. I kept coming back to those chance encounters, the ones I'd thought were fate. Had he been watching me even then, planning this trip, this moment? Or was I wrong? Paranoid, seeing threats where there were none. The photos were still in my bag, a weight I couldn't shake. I hadn't shown them to the police, not all of them. The one of me sleeping was too personal, too raw. I couldn't bear the thought of strangers seeing it, judging it. But I kept it a reminder of what I'd escaped, of the danger that might still be out there. My parents' house was a sanctuary, a place untouched by the nightmare of the Smokies. But even there, I couldn't relax. I checked the locks every night, peered out the windows, jumped at every sound. The forest had followed me, its shadows lingering in my mind. I saw that figure in every dark corner, heard his footsteps in every creak of the house. Weeks passed, then months, and I heard nothing from Philip. No calls, no messages, no sign that he was looking for me. It should have been a relief, but it wasn't. The silence was its own kind of terror. A void filled with questions I couldn't answer. Was he the stalker? Or was he a victim too? Had he set me up? Or had he simply failed to protect me? I started noticing things, small details I'd overlooked. The way he'd always known where to find me. The way he'd brushed off my concerns. The way his eyes had flickered when I mentioned the cigarette. I remembered the parties in college, the way he'd always been, there just out of sight, watching. I remembered the grocery store, the movie theater, the park moments I'd thought were coincidences, but now felt like a pattern. I don't know what's worse, believing Philip was the one who'd been following me, or believing he wasn't, and that someone else is still out there waiting. The photos are gone now, burned in a moment of panic, but their images are seared into my mind. I see them every time I close my eyes, a reminder that safety is an illusion, that the people we trust can be the ones who hurt us most. I don't go hiking anymore. The forest, once my sanctuary, is now a place of shadows, of secrets I can't unravel. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again, but I know one thing for certain. I'll never ignore my instincts again. They were screaming at me in that cabin, and I almost didn't listen. Almost. The night was a void swallowing my headlights as I drove through the winding roads of West Virginia. The silence so thick, it pressed against my chest like a warning. I live in one of the most remote corners of this state, where houses are scattered like forgotten relics, and the woods stretch endlessly, whispering secrets no one dares to hear. My name doesn't matter here. What matters is the weight of that night, the way it clawed into my mind and refuses to let go. I'm no stranger to solitude. I thrive in it. The quiet of my small community, the rhythm of my routines, the way the forest hums with life. It's all I've ever needed. But 2 weeks ago, something shifted. Something broke. And now, I'm not sure I'll ever feel safe again. That night, I was driving home from a party at my best friend's place. It was a double birthday bash for him and his sister, a tradition in our tight-knit circle. The air was thick with laughter, the kind that lingers from childhood memories, and the glow of cheap beer bottles under fairy lights. I stayed sober as always. These roads don't forgive mistakes. They twist through the mountains like veins dark and unforgiving, with stretches where the only light is what you bring with you. I'd seen too many stories of cars found in ditches, their drivers never making it home. So I sipped water, played designated driver, and soaked in the warmth of familiar faces. The party ran late, later than I'd planned. By the time I said my goodbyes, it was past midnight. I dropped off 2 friends, adding a 15-minute detour to my usual 38-minute drive. No big deal. I know these roads like the back of my hand. There's a strange comfort in their silence, the way the darkness wraps around you, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional glint of an animal's eyes in the brush. I was halfway home, the radio off, my thoughts drifting, when a sudden urgent pressure hit my bladder. I cursed under my breath. During the day, I'd have pulled over, found a tree, and been done with it. But at night, in the heart of the forest, the idea of stepping into that blackness felt wrong. The woods have their own rules, and I've lived here long enough to respect them. 5 minutes down the road, a gas station appeared, its flickering neon sign cutting through the dark like a beacon. I didn't love stopping there. The place was a relic, barely lit with peeling paint, and a vibe that screamed trouble. The guy who worked the night shift didn't help. He was rough around the edges, with a permanent scowl and eyes that seemed to size you up like prey. I'd had a run-in with him before a sharp exchange after he'd been rude one too many times. I'm not one to back down, but something about him always set my teeth on edge. Still, the alternative was the woods, and my body wasn't giving me a choice. I pulled into the lot, the gravel crunching under my tires, and parked under the dim glow of a single street lamp. The station was empty, save for the clerk inside his silhouette, slouched behind the counter. I stepped out, the cold air biting at my skin, and locked my car out of habit. The night was still the kind of quiet that feels alive, like the forest is holding its breath. I glanced at the clerk through the smudged glass window as I headed toward the bathroom around the side. He was staring at something or someone behind me, his head tilting in a subtle nod, his eyes narrowing. My stomach twisted. I turned, scanning the lot, but it was empty. Just my car, the faint hum of the neon sign, and the endless wall of trees beyond. I told myself I was imagining things. Isolation does that to you. Sometimes makes you see threats where there are none. But the feeling lingered heavy and unshakable as I pushed open the bathroom door. The bathroom was as grim as I'd expected. Cracked tiles, a flickering fluorescent light, and a sink that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. I did what I needed to do, the urgency fading, but not the unease. As I washed my hands, the cold water stinging my skin, a sound cut through the silence, a sharp, unmistakable thud, like a barn door closing. My heart lurched. I froze, straining to hear more, but the only sound was the drip of the faucet and the buzzes of the light. I rushed outside my boots, crunching on the gravel, and scanned the lot. My car was still there, untouched, its windows dark. No other vehicles, no movement, just the oppressive quiet of the night. I looked back at the station. The clerk was watching me, his face unreadable, his eyes locked on mine like he was waiting for something. I shook it off, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe another car had pulled in and left while I was inside. Maybe the clerk was just bored, staring at the only customer he'd seen all night. But as I climbed into my car and started the engine, the unease settled deeper, like a stone in my gut. I drove off the gas station, shrinking in my rearview mirror, but the clerk's stare followed me, burning into the back of my skull. The road stretched ahead, dark and endless, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The house was supposed to be my sanctuary, but that night, it felt like a trap, its walls closing in as the darkness outside pressed against the windows. I pulled into my garage, the familiar creak of the door, a small comfort after the gas station's eerie glow. My home is modest, a 2-story haven, tucked into the woods, surrounded by trees that seem to guard it as much as they isolate it. I've always loved it here, the quiet, the solitude, the way the forest seems to breathe with you. But as I stepped inside, locking the door behind me, the air felt different, heavy, like it was holding something I couldn't see. I tossed my keys on the counter, the sound too loud in the stillness, and headed upstairs. My bedroom was my refuge, a place where the world's noise couldn't reach me. I collapsed onto the bed, too tired to change my mind, replaying the gas station encounter. The clerk's nod, the thud of the car door, his unblinking stare. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't solve. I told myself I was overthinking it. The forest makes you jumpy sometimes. It's part of living here. You learn to ignore the odd noises, the shadows that move when they shouldn't. But as I drifted toward sleep, the unease clung to me, a cold hand on my shoulder. I woke with a start at 3:40 a.m., my heart pounding like I'd been running. A noise had pulled me from sleep, not loud, but wrong. A faint shuffle, like something moving downstairs. I lay still, my breath shallow, listening for it again. The house was silent, but it wasn't the comforting silence I knew. This was the kind of quiet that feels like it's waiting for you to make a mistake. I sat up, my eyes scanning the dark room. The door was slightly ajar. I froze. I always close it, have since I was a kid. It's a habit, a ritual. An open door means vulnerability, and I'd never leave it that way. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet cold against the hardwood, and crept to the door. The hallway was a tunnel of shadows, the stairs descending into darkness. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I'd been careless, distracted by the night's events. But the air felt charged, like the moment before a storm. I grabbed a flashlight from the nightstand, its beam cutting through the gloom, and moved downstairs. The house was familiar, every creak and corner mapped in my memory, but it felt foreign now, like I was trespassing in my own space. In the kitchen, I stopped. The fridge handle was sticky, a faint residue clinging to my fingers. I shone the light on it, revealing a smudge of something dark dirt, maybe, or grease. On the counter, a loaf of bread I hadn't touched was unwrapped crumbs scattered like a trail. A chair was slightly askew, its legs misaligned with the table. My pulse quickened. These weren't accidents. Someone had been here, moving through my house while I slept. The realization hit like a physical blow, my chest tightening as I gripped the flashlight harder. I checked the doors locked just as I'd left them. The windows were secure, the alarm still armed. But the signs were undeniable. Someone had been inside. My mind raced back to the gas station, to the clerk's nod, the sound of the car door. Had I brought something home with me? The thought was absurd, but it burrowed into my brain, refusing to let go. I stood in the kitchen, the flashlight beam trembling in my hand, and felt the house shift around me. It wasn't my sanctuary anymore. It was a stage, and I wasn't alone on it. I moved to the living room, my steps deliberate, the flashlight sweeping every corner. The couch was empty, but the cushions were slightly indented, as if someone had sat there. A faint smell lingered, something sharp, like sweat or tobacco. My stomach churned. I backed away, my mind screaming at me to leave, to get in the car and drive until the sun came up. But this was my home. I wasn't running. Not yet. I climbed the stairs again, checking every room, every closet, every shadow. The house was empty, but the feeling of being watched was suffocating. I locked myself in the bedroom, propped a chair against the door, and sat on the bed, the flashlight clutched like a lifeline. The night stretched on each minute, heavier than the last, and I couldn't shake the certainty that whatever had been here wasn't gone. It was waiting. The man on my couch wasn't a ghost or a shadow. He was real flesh and bone, and his presence turned my home into a battlefield. Dawn was still hours away, and the house was a prison of shadows. I hadn't slept since the noise woke me, my body wired with adrenaline, every nerve screaming. I'd checked the house twice, found nothing but the subtle signs of intrusion, the sticky fridge handle, the misplaced chair, the faint smell of tobacco. My mind kept circling back to the gas station, to the clerk's nod, to the thud that had echoed in my ears. I was starting to think I was losing it, that the isolation was playing tricks on me. But then I saw him. I'd gone to the living room to check the windows again, my flashlight cutting through the dark like a blade. The beam swept across the couch, and there he was, sprawled out, one arm dangling over the edge, his chest rising and falling as if he owned the place. A man maybe in his 40s, his clothes worn but not ragged, his face slack in sleep, my breath caught in my throat, my heart slamming against my ribs. He wasn't a figment of my imagination. He was real, and he was in my house. I stood frozen, the flashlight trembling in my hand, its light pinning him like a specimen. My first instinct was to scream, to demand answers. But something stopped me. The way he slept, so calm, so unbothered, sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't a thief, caught in the act. This was something else, something deliberate. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. My gun was upstairs, locked in a safe. I cursed myself for not grabbing it sooner. But I wasn't defenseless. I moved to the kitchen, grabbed a knife from the block, its weight grounding me, and crept back to the living room. He hadn't moved. His breathing was steady, almost mocking in its calm. I stood over him, the knife in one hand, the flashlight in the other, and felt a surge of anger. This was my home, my space, and he'd violated it. I tapped the knife against his forehead, the metal cold against his skin. His eyes opened slowly, locking onto mine. No fear, no surprise, just a blank, unreadable stare. It was like looking into a void, a man disconnected from reality. My voice shook as I spoke low and steady. The cops are on their way. Get out, or I'll cut you open. He didn't flinch. He just stared, his eyes boring into mine. And for a moment, I thought he might laugh. But he stood slow and deliberate, his movements fluid, almost predatory. He didn't speak, didn't argue. He walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped into the night without a word. I slammed the door behind him, my hands shaking as I turned the locks and leaned against it, my breath ragged. The house was silent again, but it felt different now, tainted, like the air itself had been poisoned. I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch, the knife still in my hand, the flashlight trained on the door. My mind replayed the encounter, searching for clues. His face was unremarkable, but his eyes, those eyes were wrong. They didn't belong to someone caught off guard. They belonged to someone who'd planned this, who'd wanted me to find him. And then it hit me. The gas station. The clerk's nod. The car door. I hadn't checked the trunk. The thought was a punch to the gut, stealing my breath. Had he been in my car? Had I driven him here unaware? Carrying my own nightmare home. I called Ethan, my closest friend, as soon as the sun rose. My voice cracked as I told him about the man on the couch, about the gas station, about the thud. He listened, his silence heavy with concern, and then asked me to walk him through every detail of the night. As I spoke, the pieces fell into place, each one sharper than the last. The clerk had known something. He'd nodded to someone I hadn't seen. The thud had been real, not my imagination. And the man in my house hadn't broken in. He'd come with me. The truth was a splinter under my skin, sharp and inescapable, forcing me to question everything I thought I knew about safety. The morning light did little to ease the dread that had settled into my bones. My house, once a haven, felt like a crime scene. I stood in the garage, staring at my car, the trunk, a black hole of possibilities. I hadn't checked it last night, hadn't even thought to. The idea that someone could have hidden there folded into the dark while I drove through the mountains made my skin crawl. I grabbed a crowbar from the toolbox, my hands slick with sweat, and popped the trunk. It was empty, but the air inside smelled wrong faintly, of sweat, of something human. Or maybe that was my fear talking. I drove to Ethan's place, needing to be somewhere that didn't feel tainted. He met me at the door, his face pale as I recounted the night. He didn't laugh or dismiss it. He knew me too well for that. "You need to go back to that gas station," he said, his voice firm. "That clerk knows something. You saw it in his eyes." I nodded, the anger rising again. The clerk. He was the key, the one piece of this nightmare I could confront. But the thought of going back, of standing under that flickering neon sign, made my stomach churn. I spent the day trying to piece it together. Why me? Why my house? Nothing was stolen. Nothing broken. The man hadn't attacked me, hadn't even spoken. It wasn't about robbery or violence. It was something else, something personal. I thought about the clerk, his nod, the way he'd watched me, like he was waiting for me to figure it out. Had he set me up? Was he part of some twisted game? The questions piled up, each one heavier than the last, and I felt myself unraveling my grip on reality, slipping. That afternoon, I drove back to the gas station. The lot was empty, the neon sign buzzing like a dying insect. I parked and sat there for a moment, the engine idling my hands, gripping the wheel. The clerk was inside his silhouette, unchanged, slouched behind the counter. I took a deep breath, the knife tucked into my jacket, and stepped out. The air was thick with the smell of gasoline and damp earth, the forest looming behind the station like a silent witness. Inside, the clerk looked up, his eyes narrowing as he recognized me. "Back already," he said, his voice flat, almost mocking. I didn't waste time. "Who were you nodding to last night?" I asked, my voice low, my hand resting near the knife. He leaned back, his expression unreadable, and shrugged. "Don't know what you're talking about." But his eyes betrayed him, flickering with something guilt, maybe, or amusement. I pressed harder, recounting the thud, the man in my house, the violation of my space. He didn't flinch, didn't interrupt, just watched me with that same unblinking stare. "You know something," I said, my voice rising, "and you're going to tell me, or I'll make sure everyone in this county knows you're involved." It was a bluff, but it landed. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he might talk. But he just shook his head and turned away, muttering something about crazy customers. I wanted to lunge across the counter to shake the truth out of him, but I knew it wouldn't help. I left the door slamming behind me and drove home, the anger burning hotter with every mile. Back at the house, I couldn't sit still. I checked every lock, every window, every corner. The man was gone, but his presence lingered, a stain I couldn't scrub out. I called the police, but their response was predictably useless. No evidence, no crime, just a vague promise to look into it. I hung up the frustration boiling over and sat in the dark, the knife in my lap. The forest outside was silent, but it wasn't empty. I could feel it watching, waiting just like the man had. The night didn't end when the man left. It followed me, a shadow I can't outrun, whispering doubts that echo in every quiet moment. 2 weeks have passed, but the house feels like a stranger's. I've changed the locks, installed a new alarm, even bought a dog, a scrappy mutt named Rusty, who barks at the slightest noise. But nothing erases the memory of that man on my couch, his eyes locking onto mine like he knew me. I haven't slept through the night since. Every creak, every rustle sends my heart racing. My hand reaching for the knife I now keep under my pillow. I've gone over it 1,000 times, searching for answers. The gas station clerk is still there, working his shifts, watching me with that same unreadable stare when I drive by. I haven't confronted him again. I know he won't talk, but I've started noticing things. Black cars parked just out of sight, their drivers hidden in the shadows. Footprints in the mud near my property line, too faint to be sure. A faint whiff of tobacco when I open the garage. They're small, easy to dismiss, but they add up, each one a needle in my mind. Ethan thinks I should leave this place and its ghosts behind. But this is my home, the one thing I've built for myself. I won't let some stranger take that from me. Yet the fear is relentless, a constant hum beneath my thoughts. I've started sleeping with the lights on the curtains, drawn the doors barricaded. Rusty paces at night, his ears pricked, his growls low and urgent. He senses it too, whatever it is. The forest hasn't changed, but it feels different now, like it's hiding something just beyond my sight. I've tried to piece together the man's motives. Was he high, like I first thought, his mind lost to some drug-fueled haze? Was he a drifter, looking for a place to crash? Or was it something worse, something planned, orchestrated by the clerk or someone else? The lack of answers is what haunts me most. I see his face in my dreams, those empty eyes staring through me, and I wake up gasping, my heart pounding, like it's trying to escape my chest. The worst part is the doubt. I've always trusted my instincts, my ability to read people, to stay safe in a world that doesn't always play fair. But now, I question everything. Was the clerk really involved? Or am I seeing conspiracies where there are none? Was the man alone? Or is he still out there, watching, waiting for another chance? The not knowing is a weight I carry everywhere. a shadow that darkens even the brightest days. I've started carrying the knife with me, even during the day. I check the trunk every time I get in the car, my flashlight sweeping the corners like a ritual. I avoid the gas station, taking longer routes to town. But the memory of that night follows me. The thud of the car door, the clerk's nod, the man's eyes. They're burned into me, a scar I can't see, but feel with every breath. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again, but I know one thing: I won't let this break me. Not yet. The forest swallowed us whole, its shadows curling around our footsteps like a predator sizing up its prey. I remember the moment clearly, midday sunlight slicing through the canopy, when a single twig snapped behind us, sharp as a bone breaking. I froze, my heart thudding, certain something was watching from the trees. It wasn't just the wind. It wasn't just my imagination. Something was out there, and it knew we were here. Agnes. Alice and I had been planning this trip for months. A ritual escape from the chaos of our lives. I'm a tech worker, drowning in endless notifications and virtual meetings that leave my eyes burning. Agnes. My wife is a nurse, carrying the weight of lives saved and lost, her hands steady, but her heart fraying at the edges. Alice, our friend, teaches high school, her days spent wrangling teenagers while navigating a system that seems designed to break her spirit. The Appalachian Mountains were our sanctuary, a place where the world's noise faded, replaced by the hum of cicadas and the rustle of leaves. We weren't novices. We'd hiked these trails before, tackled steep ridges, slept under stars so bright they felt like they could burn through your soul. But this trip felt different from the start, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. We'd set out at dawn, our boots crunching on the gravel trail, backpacks heavy with gear. The plan was simple: 5 days deep in the wilderness, no signal, no distractions, just the three of us and the mountains. The first day was perfect. The trail wound through ancient trees, their bark rough under my fingertips, moss soft as a whisper. We laughed as we hiked, swapping stories about work life, the stupid things that seemed so important back in the city. Agnes pointed out wildflowers, their colors vivid against the green, while Alice teased me about my terrible sense of direction. By nightfall, we'd set up camp near a small stream, its water cold enough to make your teeth ache. We cooked over a fire, the flames casting flickering shadows on our faces, and for a moment, everything felt right. But the forest has a way of reminding you it's alive, that it watches. On the second morning, I woke to find a single footprint in the mud near our tent, too large to be ours, its edges sharp, as if pressed there moments before. It wasn't human, not exactly too wide, too deep, like something heavy had stood there, staring at us while we slept. I didn't say anything to Agnes or Alice. I didn't want to ruin the mood, didn't want to admit the chill creeping up my spine. I kicked dirt over the print, told myself it was a bear, maybe a deer, anything, to quiet the voice in my head, whispering that we weren't alone. But as we hiked deeper, the forest seemed to change. The air grew heavier, the shadows longer. Even in midday, the birds stopped singing for stretches, leaving a silence so thick it pressed against my eardrums. I caught Alice glancing over her shoulder more than once, her eyes scanning the trees, though she didn't say why. That night, as we set up camp, I noticed Agnes pausing her hands, hovering over the food bags. She was staring into the darkness beyond the firelight, her face pale. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I strained my ears, but all I caught was the crackle of the fire and the distant hoot of an owl. "It's nothing," I said, more to convince myself than her. But her eyes didn't leave the trees, and I could see her fingers trembling as she tied the bags. Alice, usually the one to break tension with a joke, was quiet, her hands busy with the fire, but her gaze darting to the shadows. Feel the weight of that silence, the way it wraps around you, makes every breath feel stolen. We ate in near silence, the only sounds the clink of our spoons and the fire's soft hiss. I kept my flashlight close its beam, a thin shield against the dark. By the third day, the forest felt like a living thing, its pulse thrumming beneath our feet. We hiked higher, the trail, narrowing rocks jutting out like bones breaking through skin. The views were stunning ridges rolling into the distance, mist curling like smoke. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every rustle in the brush, every snap of a branch made my heart lurch. I told myself it was just the wilderness, that the mountains always played tricks on your mind. But then I saw it, a shadow moving between the trees, too quick to be a deer, too tall to be a fox. I stopped, my breath catching. But when I looked again, it was gone. Alice noticed my pause, her brow furrowing. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded, forcing a smile, but my hands were clammy, my pulse racing. The forest knows your secrets. It sees you when you think you're alone. We pushed on the trail, growing steeper, the air cooler as we climbed. By late afternoon, we found a clearing perfect for camp, nestled between two ridges. The sun was sinking, painting the sky, in shades of blood and gold. We worked quickly, our routine a comforting rhythm. Agnes securing the food, Alice building the fire, me pitching the tents. But as the light faded, the forest seemed to close in the trees, leaning closer, their branches like fingers brushing the back of my neck. I kept glancing into the woods, half expecting to see that shadow again, its form solidifying into something I couldn't explain. Imagine standing in a place where the air itself feels like it's watching you, waiting for you to make a mistake. That night, as we sat by the fire, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd crossed some invisible line, that the mountains were no longer our refuge, but something else entirely, something that wanted us gone. She stumbled into our camp like a ghost torn from a nightmare, her eyes wide with terror, her voice a broken plea that clawed at my heart. "Help me," she gasped, collapsing to her knees, her hands clawing at the dirt. They're coming for me." The words hit like a blade, sharp and cold. And in that moment, I knew the forest had been waiting for this. The firelight danced across her face, casting shadows that made her look half dead. Her clothes were torn strips of fabric, hanging like shredded skin, caked with mud and blood. Her hair was matted, tangled with leaves, and her skin was pale, almost translucent, as if the forest had drained the life from her. She was trembling, her breaths shallow and ragged, each one a struggle against some unseen weight. Agnes dropped the pot she was holding, the clang swallowed by the night, and rushed to her side. Hey, it's okay," Agnes said, her voice soft but firm, the way she spoke to patients in the ER, but the woman flinched at her touch, her eyes darting to the trees, as if expecting something to burst through at any moment. I stood frozen, my mind racing to make sense of her presence. We were miles from any road deep in a part of the Appalachians where even experienced hikers rarely ventured. How had she gotten here? Her words came in fragments, disjointed like a radio signal, breaking through static. "They're after me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackle of the fire. "They won't stop. I ran. I don't know how long." Her eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a chill, not from the cold, but from the raw fear in her gaze. It was the kind of fear that wasn't just about survival. It was about something deeper, something that had burrowed into her soul. Alice knelt beside her, her hands steady as she offered a bottle of water. "Drink this," she said, her tone calm but urgent. The woman took the bottle, her hands shaking so badly that water spilled down her chin mixing with the dirt on her face. She drank in gulps, choking slightly, then clutched the bottle like it was the only thing tethering her to reality. "What's your name?" Alice asked. But the woman didn't answer, her eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the firelight. Feel the weight of her silence, the way it pulls you into her terror, makes you question what's hiding just out of sight. Agnes wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, her movements gentle but deliberate. "You're safe now," she said, though her voice wavered, betraying her own uncertainty. I could see the questions in her eyes, the same ones racing through my mind. Was she delusional? On drugs? Or was something really out there, hunting her? The forest was silent now. The usual nighttime sounds, crickets, owls, the rustle of leaves, gone as if the woods themselves were listening. I scanned the trees, my flashlight beam cutting through the dark, but it revealed nothing but shadows twisting in the wind. The woman's story came out in pieces, each word heavy with dread. She said she'd been running for days, maybe weeks, her sense of time shattered. She spoke of a man, someone who'd been following her, his presence a constant shadow she couldn't escape. "He knows where I am," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He always knows." Her words sent a shiver through me, not just because of what she said, but how she said it, like she was already resigned to her fate. I wanted to ask more to understand who this man was, but her eyes were wild, her breathing erratic, and I knew pushing her would only make things worse. We decided to feed her, hoping it would calm her. Agnes heated oatmeal over the fire, the smell of it mixing with the sharp tang of pine and the faint metallic scent of the woman's blood. She ate slowly, wincing with each bite, as if her body had forgotten how to accept nourishment. I watched her, my mind spinning with possibilities. Was she a hiker who'd gotten lost? A runaway? Or something worse? Someone who'd stumbled into something the forest didn't want her to see. The mountains keep secrets, and they don't let go easily. I remembered stories. I'd heard tales of people vanishing in these woods. Their bodies never found, their stories swallowed by the trees. Alice sat close to her, speaking in low tones, trying to piece together her story. The woman mentioned a cabin, a place where she'd been kept, though she couldn't say where. It was dark, she said, her voice hollow. Always dark. He'd leave me there, but I could hear him outside, pacing, waiting. Her words painted a picture so vivid, I could almost see it. A crumbling cabin, deep in the woods. Its windows boarded the air thick with the stench of fear. I glanced at Agnes, who was listening intently, her face pale. She'd seen things in the ER, trauma, abuse, the aftermath of violence. But this was different. This was raw, primal, like the forest itself had birthed this woman's terror. As the night deepened, the fire began to die, its embers glowing faintly. The woman grew quieter, her eyes heavy, but she refused to sleep, her body tense as if braced for an attack. We agreed to take turns, keeping watch, not just for her, but for ourselves. The forest felt different now, its silence not peaceful, but predatory, like it was waiting for us to let our guard down. I sat by the fire, my flashlight in one hand, a knife in the other, my eyes straining to pierce the darkness. Every shadow feels like a threat, every sound a warning. I thought of the footprint I'd seen, the way it didn't quite fit any animal I knew. Was it connected to her, to the man she feared? The questions gnawed at me, each one tightening the knot in my chest. By the time the moon rose pale and thin, the woman had curled up under the blanket, her breathing uneven but steadier. Agnes stayed by her side, her hand resting lightly on the woman's shoulder, a silent promise of protection. Alice and I exchanged glances, our unspoken agreement clear. We couldn't leave her, not like this. But staying meant facing whatever was out there, whatever had driven her to this state. The forest doesn't forgive. It watches, it waits, and it takes what it wants. As I stared into the dark, I felt it a presence, not just in the trees, but in the air, in the ground beneath us. It was as if the mountains had woken up and they were hungry. He stepped from the trees like a nightmare, given form, his gun gleaming in the firelight, his eyes cold as the void. "Give her to me," he said, his voice low. Deliberate, each word a blade slicing through the silence. I felt my blood turn to ice, my body rooted to the ground, as if the forest itself was holding me in place, daring me to move. The fire was dying, its glow barely reaching the edges of our camp when he appeared. One moment, the woods were empty. The next, he was there, standing just beyond the light, his silhouette sharp against the dark. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face half hidden by a hood, but his eyes, they burned not with anger, but with something worse, something empty. The gun in his hand was steady, its barrel catching the flicker of the flames, and it was pointed at us, not her. I felt Agnes tense beside me, her hand tightening on the blanket she'd draped over the woman. Alice stood slowly, her movements careful, her eyes locked on the man. The woman let out a small, choked sound, like a trapped animal, and curled tighter into herself. "I don't want trouble," he said, his voice calm, almost conversational, but it carried a weight that made my skin crawl. Just give her to me, and you can all walk away. His gaze shifted to the woman, and for the first time, I saw a smile, thin, cruel, the kind that made you want to run, but knew you couldn't. Feel the chill of that smile, the way it burrows into your soul, promising pain. I wanted to speak, to shout, to do something, but my throat was dry, my mind blank. The forest was silent, the air heavy, as if it was complicit in his presence, as if it had summoned him. Agnes stepped forward, placing herself between the woman and the man, her voice steady, despite the fear I knew she felt. "She's not going anywhere with you," she said, her words sharp, defiant. The man's smile widened, and he tilted his head, studying her like a predator sizing up its prey. "You don't know what you're doing," he said, his tone almost pitying. "You don't know what she is." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I couldn't grasp, and for a moment I wondered if we'd made a mistake, if the woman's fear was hiding something darker. But then I saw her eyes widen and pleading, and I knew she was no threat. She was a victim, and this man was her tormentor. Alice moved before I could process what was happening. In a flash, she grabbed a burning branch from the fire, its flames licking the air, and hurled it at his face. The branch struck him square in the chest, embers exploding across his jacket, and he stumbled back the gun, dropping to the ground with a dull thud. The forest erupted into chaos. His curse, the crackle of the fire, the woman's scream piercing the night. Agnes lunged forward, her nurse's instincts replaced by something raw, primal, as she scooped up the gun and pointed it at the man. "Get out!" she shouted, her voice shaking but unwavering. He staggered, clutching his face where the embers had burned his eyes, wild with rage and surprise. For a moment, I thought he'd charge, that he'd fight back, but he didn't. He backed away, his gaze locked on Agnes, then on the woman, who was now sobbing, her hands covering her face. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low, a promise that sent a shiver down my spine. Then he melted into the trees, the darkness swallowing him as if he'd never been there. The forest doesn't just hide monsters, it creates them. I stood there, my heart pounding, my mind struggling to catch up. The gun in Agnes's hand trembled slightly, her knuckles white, and I realized she was shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline coursing through her. We turned to the woman, expecting her to be there, but she was gone. Panic surged through me, my eyes scanning the camp. "Where is she?" Alice whispered, her voice hoarse. "We found her." Moments later, curled up inside Agnes's tent, her knees pulled to her chest, her body shaking like a leaf in a storm. She looked so small, so broken, that my heart ached. "It's okay," Agnes said, kneeling beside her. But the woman didn't respond, her eyes fixed on some unseen horror. Imagine the terror that lingers in silence, the kind that doesn't need words to scream. We didn't know what to do, didn't know if the man would return, but we knew we couldn't stay here, not with him out there waiting. Alice and I dragged logs to block the tent's entrance, a futile gesture against someone with a gun, but it was all we could do. Agnes kept the gun close, her eyes scanning the darkness, while I tried to calm the woman, though my own fear made my words feel hollow. "We're going to get you out of here," I said, hoping I sounded more confident than I felt. She nodded, barely, her eyes still distant, as if she was seeing something we couldn't. The forest was silent again, but it wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of a predator, waiting for its moment. Every rustle, every shadow, feels like a threat closing in. I sat by the tent, my knife in hand, my heart racing, knowing that the night was far from over. I ran through the forest, my flashlight beam slicing through the dark, each step a gamble against the roots and rocks that seemed to reach for me. The air was cold, sharp, filling my lungs with the taste of fear. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves felt like him, the man with the cruel smile, his eyes burning through the trees, waiting to finish what he started. We couldn't stay in that camp, not after he'd come for her, not after we'd seen the emptiness in his eyes. The woman was still in the tent, her breathing shallow, her body curled tight, as if she could make herself disappear. Agnes and Alice stayed with her, the gun still in Agnes's hand, its weight a grim reminder of how close we'd come to disaster. I volunteered to find a signal, to call for help, because staying put felt like waiting for death. The plan was simple, but terrifying hike to higher ground. Pray for a bar of service and get a rescue team to us before he came back. Feel the dread of stepping into the dark, knowing something is waiting, watching, biding its time. I grabbed my flashlight and a small knife, the blade cold against my palm, and set out into the night. The forest was different after dark, its beauty replaced by something sinister. The trees loomed like sentinels, their branches clawing at the sky, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something sharper, like decay. Every step echoed in my ears, the crunch of leaves, too loud, too revealing. I kept my flashlight low, its beam a thin thread of light in the overwhelming black. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional snap of a branch or the distant call of an owl, each sound making my heart lurch. The forest is alive, and it doesn't want you here. I climbed a ridge, my legs burning, my breath coming in short gasps. The higher I went, the more exposed I felt, as if the darkness was peeling back my defenses, leaving me raw. I kept seeing his face in my mind, that cold smile, the way he'd looked at the woman, like she was his possession. What had he done to her? How long had she been running? Her story haunted me, fragments of it, piecing together in my head a cabin, days or weeks of captivity, the constant fear of his return. I imagined her trapped in that darkness, her screams muffled by the forest, and it made my stomach churn. Halfway up the ridge, I stopped my flashlight, catching something in the brush, a scrap of fabric torn and stained, hanging from a branch, like a flag of surrender. I froze, my pulse hammering. Was it hers? Had she come this way, running from him? Or was it something else, a marker left by someone or something else? I didn't touch. It didn't dare. I kept moving my eyes, scanning the trees, my knife gripped tight. Every shadow is a threat, every sound a warning. The forest seemed to pulse with a life of its own, its heartbeat matching mine, fast and unsteady. At the top of the ridge, I checked my phone, my hands shaking as I held it up. One bar flickered, then disappeared, then flickered again. I moved slowly, searching for a signal, my breath visible in the cold air. The moonlight barely reached me, the canopy too thick, and I felt like I was standing in a void. Finally, the signal held just enough to make a call. I dialed 911, my voice trembling as I explained where we were, what had happened. "There's a man with a gun," I said, my words tumbling out. "He's after a woman we found. We need help now." The operator's voice was calm, steady, a lifeline in the dark. But the call dropped twice before I could give our exact coordinates. I stood there alone on the ridge, the phone pressed to my ear, waiting for the operator to call back. The forest was silent, but it wasn't empty. I could feel it, eyes on me, unseen, unblinking. I swung my flashlight around its beam, catching nothing but trees and shadows. But the feeling didn't fade. Imagine standing alone in the dark, knowing you're not alone, knowing something is watching, waiting. I started back down the ridge, my steps faster now, the knife in my hand, a pitiful defense against whatever was out there. When I reached the camp, Agnes and Alice were still by the tent, their faces pale in the firelight. The woman was inside her, breathing uneven, her eyes closed, but her body tense. "Did you get through?" "Agnes?" asked her voice, barely above a whisper. I nodded, my throat tight. "They're coming," I said, hoping it was true. We waited the hours, stretching into eternity. Every sound amplified the crack of a branch, the rustle of leaves, the distant howl of something that wasn't a wolf. We took turns keeping watch. The gun passed between us, its weight a constant reminder of the danger we were in. Just before dawn, the rescue team arrived, their flashlights cutting through the dark like beacons. They moved quickly, efficiently, their voices low but commanding. They took the woman first, her body limp as they carried her to a stretcher. At the hospital, we learned the truth. She was Canadian, missing for over 2 months. Her family, certain she was dead. Her ex-boyfriend, the man with the gun, had snapped when she left him, tracking her across borders, isolating her in a cabin deep in the wilderness. She'd escaped, running through the forest for days, her body and mind pushed to the breaking point. He was caught a few days later, his face blank, his eyes empty, just as I remembered. That night changed us, the forest. Once our escape was now a place of nightmares, its shadows hiding truths we weren't meant to see. We still hike, but never in the Appalachians. The mountains keep their secrets, and we learned the hard way what happens when you stumble into them. The wilderness doesn't forgive. It watches, it waits, and it never forgets. I was driving through the endless curves of West Virginia's back roads, the headlights slicing through a darkness so deep it seemed to swallow the stars. My hands gripped the wheel, tired but steady, as I chased a fleeting sense of freedom. I didn't know then that freedom was a lie, that the road was leading me straight into a trap, a place where fear would claw its way into my bones and never let go. The summer of 2023 was supposed to be my escape. I was 27, burned out from a soul-crushing job in Pittsburgh, drowning in medical debt that clung to me like damp rot. The plan was simple drive to Knoxville to visit a friend, take the long way stop when I felt like it, and let the open road stitch my fraying nerves back together. I'd always loved West Virginia's wild beauty, its mountains, its forests, the way the trees seemed to whisper secrets older than time. But I also knew its reputation. The disappearances, the stories of things going wrong, in the middle of nowhere. I wasn't naive. I'd heard the warnings. But I figured a quick trip, a few days of freedom, couldn't hurt. I was wrong. The first day was perfect. The sun hung low, painting the hills gold. And I stopped to take photos of valleys that looked like they hadn't changed in centuries. I felt alive, untethered, like I could outrun my problems if I just kept moving. By the second day, though, exhaustion started creeping in. My eyes my shoulders ached, and the road seemed to stretch on forever. I knew better than to drive half asleep. A few years back, I'd pulled over for a nap in a remote spot and woke up to slashed tires, a lesson I didn't need twice. So when I saw a faded sign for a motel just 2 miles ahead, I didn't hesitate. It wasn't much, just a flicker of neon in the distance, but it promised a bed, a shower, and a few hours to reset. I didn't know it would be the last time I'd feel safe for a long time. The motel appeared like a relic from another era, tucked behind a wall of towering pines. It was an L-shaped building, low and sagging, with peeling paint and a sign that buzzed faintly. Half its letters burned out. Only a couple of cars sat in the lot, their outlines barely visible in the dusk. I pulled into the gravel parking lot, the crunch under my tires, louder than it should have been. Something about the place felt off. Not dangerous, just wrong. Like it didn't belong in the present. But I was too tired to care. I grabbed my backpack, locked the car, and headed for the office. The front desk was a small, stuffy room with a thick glass window that looked more like a bunker than a check-in counter. The man behind it was old, his skin weathered and red, like he'd spent decades under a punishing sun. He barely looked up as I slid my ID through the slot. "Room 7, he muttered, handing me a heavy metal key with a red plastic tag. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "Windows are bulletproof." His voice was flat, like he was stating the weather. I forced a laugh, asking if that was really necessary. He looked at me, eyes dull, and said, "It's West Virginia." No smile, no warmth. Just those words hanging in the air, like a warning I didn't know how to read. I brushed it off, chalking it up to small-town eccentricity, and headed to my room. Room 7 was at the far end of the building, right where I'd parked. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a space that smelled of damp wood and cheap bleach. The carpet was dark-stained in ways that made my skin crawl. A double bed sagged against one wall. A scratched dresser held an ancient TV, and a metal chair sat by a small table. It was grim, but I'd stayed in worse. I went back to the car for my picnic blanket, unwilling to touch the bed's sheets, and locked the door behind me. The lock felt flimsy, like a good shove could break it, but I pushed the thought away. I just needed sleep. A quick shower, a few hours of rest, and I'd be back on the road by morning. The shower was a disappointment. Water sputtered out in weak bursts, barely warm enough to cut through the chill. I dried off, spread my blanket on the bed, and lay down my body, heavy with exhaustion. My mind raced, though. Work debt, the endless grind, it all pressed against me, a weight I couldn't shake. But fatigue won out, and within minutes I was sinking into a deep, dreamless sleep. I've always been a heavy sleeper, the kind who could doze through a thunderstorm. That night, though, something broke through, something that didn't belong. It wasn't a sound, not at first. It was a feeling, a jolt, that ripped me from sleep, like a hook through my chest. My eyes snapped open, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. For a moment, I was sure I'd been shot. The air was thick, the room pitch black, and a dull thud echoed in my ears like a gunshot had gone off somewhere between dream and reality. I sat up, gasping, my hands fumbling across my chest, expecting blood. Nothing. Just my racing pulse and a silence so heavy it felt alive. I told myself it was a dream, a trick of my tired mind, but the feeling wouldn't leave. Something was wrong. Something was here. I slid out of bed, my bare feet hitting the cold carpet. The darkness pressed against me, thick and suffocating. I crept toward the window, my breath shallow, and parted the curtains just enough to peek outside. The parking lot was empty, the trees still their branches clawing at the sky. No movement, no lights, just an endless void of black. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, a nightmare, a door slamming somewhere nearby. But the desk clerk's words about bulletproof glass kept circling in my head, each repetition louder, sharper. I lay back down, my body tense, waiting for sleep to pull me under again. That's when I heard it. 3 loud knocks, deliberate and heavy, like someone was testing the door's strength. The knocks came again slow and deliberate, each one a hammer against my skull. My blood turned to ice, my breath caught in my throat. The room was a void, the darkness so complete, it felt like it was swallowing me whole. Then a voice, low, gravelly, dripping with menace, slithered through the door. "Open up. I just want your wallet. Do it quick, and maybe you'll walk away alive." My heart stopped. This wasn't a dream. Someone was here, and they wanted me to open the door. I stood, frozen, my hand hovering over the doorknob, every instinct screaming not to move. The voice came again, louder, more insistent, like it knew I was listening. "Don't make this hard. I don't want to hurt you." The words were calm, almost reasonable, but they carried a weight that made my stomach churn. I backed away, my bare feet silent on the carpet, my mind racing for a plan. The room was a cage, small, cluttered, with nowhere to hide. The lock was weak, the door thinner than it should have been. I could hear the handle jiggle the wood, creaking as someone pushed against it. They were testing it, probing for weakness. My eyes darted around the room, searching for anything to defend myself with. The metal chair by the table was too flimsy, the lamp too heavy to swing. My keys, phone, and wallet were on the dresser, but they were useless against whoever was out there. I thought about shouting back, bluffing that I had a gun, but my throat was too dry, my voice trapped somewhere deep inside. The knocking stopped, replaced by a soft scraping, like a blade dragging across the door. My pulse roared in my ears, drowning out everything else. I needed to move to act, but fear had me pinned in place. I crept toward the window again, my hands shaking as I parted the curtains. That's when I saw him. Not the one at the door, but another figure standing just outside the glow of the motel's flickering neon sign. He was still unnaturally, so his silhouette sharp against the darkness. He wore a mask, a rabbit mask, its fur disturbingly realistic, the eyes hollow and black. He wasn't moving, just staring, his head tilted slightly, like he was savoring my fear. My breath hitched, my chest tightening as our eyes locked through the glass. The mask's smile was grotesque, a twisted mockery of something playful, and it sent a shiver down my spine that felt like it would never stop. I stumbled back, my mind screaming at me to do something, anything. The banging on the door grew louder, more violent, the wood groaning under the force. "Open the damn door," the voice shouted. No longer, calm now, raw with impatience. I glanced at the bathroom, the only other space in the room. It wasn't much, but it was something a door to put between me and them. I grabbed my phone and ran my feet slipping on the carpet as I crossed the room. The bathroom door was flimsy, barely latching, but I slammed it shut and leaned all my weight against it. My heart pounding so hard, I thought it would burst. The banging didn't stop. It was rhythmic now, relentless, each hit shaking the walls. I fumbled with my phone, my fingers clumsy as I tried to dial 911. The signal was weak, the bars flickering in and out, but I managed to get through. Someone's trying to break into my room, I whispered, my voice barely audible. The dispatcher's voice was calm, steady, a lifeline in the chaos. "Stay where you are," she said. "Officers are on their way. Keep the line open." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me, clutching the phone, like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. The bathroom was small, the air damp and heavy, with the smell of mildew. Above the tub was a narrow window, barely wide enough for a person to fit through. I climbed onto the tub, my hands shaking as I pushed at the frame. It was stuck rusted shut, but panic gave me strength. I shoved harder, the metal groaning as it gave way. The banging on the room door was deafening, now the wood splintering with each hit. I didn't have time to think. I wedged myself into the window, the edges scraping my skin as I forced my body through. The night air hit me like a slap, cold and sharp, as I dropped onto the wet gravel outside. I landed hard, my knees buckling the ground slick with rain-soaked leaves. I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The motel lot was dark, the trees looming like silent witnesses. I ran toward the nearest shadow, ducking behind a tree, my phone still pressed to my ear. The dispatcher's voice was faint now, the signal cutting in and out. "Stay hidden," she said. "They're almost there." I crouched low, my heart hammering, every rustle of leaves sounding like footsteps. Then I heard it, a sharp, heavy crash, like the room door had finally given way. My stomach dropped. They were inside. I peered around the tree, my eyes straining in the dark. The rabbit-masked figure was gone, but I could hear voices now, low and urgent, coming from the direction of my room. And then a scream, a woman's scream, high and piercing, cutting through the night like a blade. My blood ran cold. Was there someone else? Had they been waiting for me to leave? The dispatcher's voice crackled through the phone, asking me to describe what I heard. But I couldn't speak. The scream had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that felt worse than any sound. I stayed there, hidden in the shadows, every muscle tensed, waiting for the police. The minutes stretched on, each one an eternity. My mind raced with questions. Who were they? Why me? Had they been watching me? From the moment I pulled into the lot, the clerk's words about bulletproof glass echoed again, each repetition twisting the knife deeper. This wasn't random. This was planned. And I had walked right into it. The trees closed in around me, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. I crouched in the wet dirt, my breath shallow, every sound amplified in the suffocating dark. The scream still echoed in my mind, a jagged wound that wouldn't close. They were in my room now, searching their voices, a low hum that carried on the wind. I wasn't safe here, not in the shadows, not anywhere. The motel was a trap, and I was the prey, running blind into a forest that felt alive with malice. I pressed myself against the tree, the bark rough against my back, my phone clutched in my trembling hand. The dispatcher's voice was a faint lifeline, cutting in and out as the signal struggled. "Officers are 10 minutes out," she said, her calm tone infuriatingly out of place. 10 minutes. It might as well have been 10 hours. I could still hear movement from the motel footsteps crunching on gravel, a low murmur of voices. The rabbit-masked figure was out there somewhere. His hollow eyes burned into my memory, watching, waiting. I needed to move. Staying still felt like surrender, like letting them win. I scanned the darkness, my eyes adjusting to the faint moonlight filtering through the trees. The forest stretched out endlessly, a maze of shadows and whispers. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay here. I took a deep breath, the air cold and damp, and started moving, keeping low, my footsteps muffled by the wet leaves. Every step felt like a gamble, each snap of a twig, a betrayal of my position. The motel faded behind me, its neon glow swallowed by the trees. I moved deeper into the woods, my heart pounding, my senses on edge. The forest was alive with sounds. Crickets rustling leaves, the distant hoot of an owl. But they felt wrong, like a mask hiding something sinister. I kept the phone to my ear. The dispatcher's voice, a faint anchor. "Can you see anything?" she asked. I wanted to scream that I couldn't see anything, that the darkness was a living thing pressing against me. But I whispered instead, "Just trees. I'm in the woods." I didn't know how far I'd gone when I heard it, a branch snapping, sharp and deliberate, somewhere behind me. I froze, my breath catching my body screaming to run, but my mind begging me to stay still. Another snap closer this time, followed by a low, guttural sound, like a chuckle muffled by the mask. My blood turned to ice. He was following me. The rabbit-masked man, or maybe the one from the door, or both. I didn't know. I didn't care. All I knew was that I wasn't alone. I started moving again, faster, now my feet slipping on the wet ground. The forest seemed to shift around me, the trees closing in their branches, snagging my clothes like greedy hands. I stumbled over roots, my hands scraping against bark as I caught myself. The dispatcher's voice crackled, asking me to stay calm. But calm was a distant memory. Fear was all I had now, raw and consuming, driving me forward through the dark. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost meaning, each second blending into the next, measured only by the pounding of my heart and the burn in my lungs. I kept expecting to see lights, to hear sirens, but there was nothing, just the endless forest, and the sense that something was gaining on me. I stopped to catch my breath, leaning against a tree, my chest heaving. That's when I saw it. A flicker of movement just beyond the edge of my vision. A shape, tall and lean, slipping between the trees. The mask caught the moonlight, its fur glinting the smile, fixed and cruel. I bolted my legs, moving before my brain could catch up. The forest blurred around me, a kaleidoscope of shadows and fear. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to keep moving. The dispatcher's voice was gone now, the signal dead, my phone useless in my hand. I shoved it into my pocket and ran my breath, ragged, my body screaming in protest. The ground sloped downward, the trees thinning slightly, and I caught a glimpse of open space ahead. A clearing, maybe a road. Hope flared, sharp and fleeting, but it was enough to keep me going. I burst into the clearing, my lungs burning, my legs shaking. It wasn't a road, just an open patch of grass surrounded by more trees. I spun around, searching for a way out, but the forest seemed to mock me, its shadows deeper, its silence heavier. I heard it again, the chuckle, low and deliberate, coming from the trees behind me. I turned my hands, clenched into fists, ready to fight, to scream, to do anything but give up. But there was nothing, just darkness, and the echo of that laugh sinking into my bones. I sank to my knees, the wet grass soaking through my jeans, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. The dispatcher's voice came back, faint and distorted, telling me to hold on, that help was close. I clung to those words, repeating them in my head like a prayer. But the forest didn't care. It watched, waited its silence, a promise of something worse to come. The clearing was a trap, a stage set for my fear, and I was the only actor left. The chuckle came again closer, now, slithering through the trees like a snake. My knees sank deeper into the wet grass, my body heavy, my mind screaming to run, but too tired to obey. The rabbit mask was out there, its hollow eyes, watching it smile, a cruel promise. I wasn't just running from a man. I was running from something that felt wrong, something that didn't belong in this world. I forced myself to stand, my legs shaking, my breath coming in short, desperate gasps. The clearing was small, ringed by trees that seemed to lean inward, their branches knitting together to block out the sky. The moonlight barely reached the ground, casting long, twisted shadows that moved even when nothing else did. I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the darkness, waiting for the mask to appear. The chuckle had stopped, but the silence was worse, thick and oppressive, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I took a step, then another, my hands outstretched, feeling for anything solid. My foot caught on a root, and I stumbled, catching myself against a tree. The bark was cold, slick with moss, and for a moment, I swore I felt it pulse under my fingers like a heartbeat. I yanked my hand back, my heart racing, my mind teetering on the edge of panic. "You're losing it," I whispered to myself, the sound of my own voice startling in the quiet. But I wasn't losing it. I was being hunted. I started moving again faster, now my feet crunching on the forest floor. The trees seemed to shift their shapes, blurring as I ran, like they were guiding me deeper into the maze. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to keep moving. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the phone again, faint but urgent. "Officers are close. Can you see any landmarks?" Landmarks. There was nothing but trees and shadows, an endless nightmare that refused to let me go. I don't know how long I ran before I saw it. A flicker of light, faint but real, cutting through the dark. A road, maybe, or headlights. I pushed toward it, my legs burning, my lungs screaming for air. The light grew brighter, and I could hear the faint hum of an engine, the crunch of tires on gravel. Relief flooded through me, sharp and overwhelming, but it was short-lived. Behind me, I heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate, matching my pace. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just ran the light, my only hope. I burst onto the road, the asphalt cold under my feet, the headlights blinding. A police car, its lights flashing, screeched to a stop just feet away. I collapsed onto the pavement, my hands scraping against the rough surface, my breath coming in ragged sobs. The officers were out of the car in seconds, their voices sharp and commanding, asking me what happened, where I'd come from. I could barely speak, my words tumbling out in a jumbled mess. The motel, I gasped. They're in my room. The mask, the rabbit mask. One officer stayed with me, his hand on my shoulder, while the other radioed for backup. They told me to stay put, that they'd check the motel. I nodded, my body trembling, my eyes fixed on the trees. I half expected to see the mask again, its smile gleaming in the dark, but there was nothing. just the forest, silent and unyielding. The officer asked me to describe the men, but I couldn't. The mask was all I could see. Its hollow eyes burned into my mind like a brand. They drove me back to the motel, the lights of the cruiser cutting through the night. The parking lot was empty, the neon sign still buzzing faintly. The officers searched my room, their flashlights sweeping across the carpet, the bed, the bathroom. The door was broken, the wood splintered where it had been forced open. But there was no one there, no mask, no voices, no sign of the scream I'd heard. The clerk was still at the desk, his face pale, insisting he hadn't seen or heard anything. I told them about the cars I'd seen in the lot when I arrived, but they were gone now, vanished into the night. The officers took my statement, their faces unreadable. They asked about the scream, the mask, the voices, but I could tell they weren't sure what to make of it. They mentioned a gas station robbery a few miles away, said it might be connected, but they had no proof. I sat in the back of the cruiser, my blanket wrapped around me, trying to piece together what had happened. Had the mask been real? Had the scream? Or was my mind breaking under the weight of fear? The motel faded in the rearview mirror as I drove away, the road stretching out like a lifeline back to sanity. But sanity felt like a lie, now a fragile thing that could shatter with a single glance in the dark. The rabbit mask was still there in my mind, its smile a permanent scar. Every shadow felt like a threat, every sound a reminder that I'd come too close to something I didn't understand. I was alive, but I wasn't free. Not anymore. I drove in silence, the radio off, the hum of the engine, the only sound. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly, my knuckles ached. My eyes darting to the mirrors every few seconds, half expecting to see a black Toyota or a figure in a mask. The police had let me go after taking my statement, their voices clipped and professional, promising to follow up. But I knew they wouldn't find anything. The motel was a black hole, swallowing evidence, swallowing truth. I didn't stop until I reached my friend's place in Knoxville, the dawn breaking over the horizon, painting the sky a sickly red. For days, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the mask, felt the weight of those hollow eyes. The scream echoed in my dreams, sometimes a woman's, sometimes my own. I called the police a few days later, desperate for answers. They told me about the gas station robbery, how they'd arrested 3 men, but one had gotten away. They asked if I could identify them, but I hadn't seen faces, only the mask. They said it might be connected, that the men might have been at the motel, but they had no proof. The rabbit mask was never found. and the men denied everything. I tried to go back to my life, to the grind of work and debt, but nothing felt the same. The world was sharper now, more dangerous. I'd always been a heavy sleeper, but now I woke at every sound. A creak, a gust of wind, the hum of a distant car. I started checking locks obsessively, wedging chairs against doors, even in my own apartment. The smell of damp soil or wood smoke would send my heart racing, my body remembering the motel, the forest, the chase. It wasn't just fear. It was a violation, a theft of the safety I'd taken for granted. I never stayed in a motel again. I researched every hotel, every Airbnb, every place I slept, looking for reviews, crime reports, anything to reassure me. But reassurance was a lie. The world wasn't safe, not anymore. I'd seen its underbelly, the part that hides in the shadows of remote roads and forgotten motels. I'd felt its eyes on me, watching, waiting. 2 years later, the memories haven't faded. They're quieter, buried under the noise of daily life. But they're there, waiting for a trigger, a scent, a sound, a glimpse of something in the dark. I don't talk about it much. Friends listen, nod, but they don't understand. They think it's a story, something to shrug off, but I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And I know that somewhere out there, in the endless stretch of West Virginia's mountains, the rabbit mask is still watching, its smile a promise that it's not done with me yet.